Chapter 29, Genesis. After his journey towards east, that is Jacob, he did arrive at the home of Laban, his mother's brother. Laban himself, he lived in Haran, that is Mesopotamia, outside of the land God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and in the previous chapter also to Jacob. Jacob had left his homeland, that is in Canaan, both to find a wife and among his father's people and to escape the murderous rage of his older brother Esau. We did start about that in the last episode, that is episode 27, specifically chapter 27 verse 41. Jacob's plan is to seek out the former household of his mother, Rebekah, and her brother Laban. First, though, Jacob comes across a well in a field. He did ask. He asked some shepherds gathered near the well with their flocks if they knew Laban and if he was, doing well. They did know him, and in fact, they pointed, Jacob to Laban's daughter, Rachel, while she arrived with her own flock to water them. Jacob, he did immediately roll out the stone that was on the mouth of the well so as to water Rachel's sheep. We'll study about that mostly in verses 1 to 10. This itself might have been an effort to impress her, that is to impress Rachel, as later verses will show that Jacob came to love Rachel very, very much. Jacob became very emotional thereafter, finding himself, even kissing her. And he did not only kiss her, but he also wept out loudly. Finally, he told her who he was. And, she did run to tell her father, Laban, wherein Laban quickly came and arrived to meet, his nephew. And when he did reach, he, hugged Jacob, they kissed, and eventually welcomed him to his own home. Jacob told Laban he told Laban some version of his story and how he came to be there. And Laban acknowledged that indeed he was truly his relative. We'll start about that in verses 11 to 14. Of course, after Jacob had been with the family for quite some time, I think it was about a month, and working for Laban, the uncle, he asked him what wages he would like to be paid if he was to continue working for the man. The implication here is that Jacob is a good worker and a very helpful man to Laban. This goes without saying that Laban didn't actually have boys. He probably had only those two girls, that's Leah and Rachel. So possibly Jacob's presence played a big role as the son in the house. Jacob, who sort of has, come in part of to find a wife, offers to work for, Laban for 7 years in exchange for marrying Laban's younger daughter, that is Rachel, whom, of course, Jacob loved. We'll start about that in verses 15 to 18. The intense love for Rachel will be an important contrast to Jacob's feelings to her older sister Leah later on in this chapter. Stick around as we study more details there. So Laban quickly, he agreed to the offer. He agreed to the deal. It was an extremely very generous offer. And indeed, years did fly by as Jacob worked for his uncle. When the time had passed, Laban threw a wedding feast. That is after the 7 years. And on the wedding night, however, Laban managed to switch between Rachel and her older sister, Leah. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which dimension you look at it, Jacob slept with Leah without realizing she is not Rachel. Apparently, in that time and place, this was enough to constitute a legal marriage between two parties. When Jacob, of course, realized the next morning that what had happened, he demanded to know why Laban had done such a thing, such an outrageous deception unto him. Laban, his uncle, he calmly told Jacob that their custom does not allow a younger daughter to marry first in verses 26. Hey, as if he could have told him that in the past, in the 7 years while he was working and hustling for the uncle. Now, obviously, even if it were true, it is information Laban should have held back for 7 years. The entire arrangement was just an obvious ploy on Laban's part. Here, here then, here then is Jacob's, getting a taste with this kind of deception. We could say he's sort of getting a taste of his own, medicine. Remember, he lied and he manipulated his father earlier on in Genesis chapter 27 about the blessings and getting the blessing of Esau and wearing himself the clothes of Esau, the wood of the sheep, and you can pick up episode 27 if you haven't already watched it. It has some quite interesting details there. Now, as if in the generosity, Laban offers to allow Jacob to marry Rachel the next week in exchange for another 7 years of work, totaling to what, 14 years. Now, in spite of Laban's manipulation, Jacob agreed to the deal. He agrees to marry Rachel again and still work for another 7 years. We'll study about that in verses 27 to 30. Looking back on this passage after reading about Jacob's remaining life, it turns out he has gained about 4 wives, you could say, give or take. That is, two of whom are really servants. Each of the wives had their own servant. Now, to Jacob, those could have been concubines in span, and he gained his 4 wives in a span of about 7 days. Now, both of the servants given to Laban's daughters at their weddings will wind up bearing children to Jacob as well. In Genesis chapter 30, we'll study about that in 32 to 3 and 39 to 10. Now married twice over and with more 7 years of unpaid work ahead of him, Jacob settled in. Leah, though, is deeply wounded by the fact that Jacob loved Rachel more than he loved her. In fact, Jacob is said to hate Leah, at least by comparison. Given the circumstances of their marriage, this is hardly a surprise anyways. The Lord, who is always with Jacob, takes notice of Leah's, heartbreak, and he allows her to bear children, while her younger sister, the beloved wife, the better beloved sister, remains barren, as we're going to see in verses 31. Jacob's first 3 sons from his, in quotes, unloved wife, then named as a result of Leah's faith. Leah trusted in the Lord, and he trusted in God, who noticed her pain and her hope, or lack of it, that Jacob will now turn his heart towards her, and that maybe one day she will wake up because of the kid she's born for Jacob. He will again fall in love with her and, start living happily with her. Now, in spite of Leah bearing Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, however, Jacob apparently remains unloving toward Leah, as we're going to see in verses 32 to 34. Leah seemed to give up, hoping that bearing sons will increase Jacob's love for her. Unfortunately, she named her fourth boy Judah, which literally means praise, or may God be praised. Leah's faith in God's goodness remained intact, even while her hope that her husband will love her appeared to slip away, as we're going to see in verses 35. The last verse of this chapter specifically indicates that Leah stopped conceiving children after Judah. Now, this could have been, or might have been, due to a temporary time of infertility. However, the next chapter speaks of Rachel's anger that Leah has had children while Rachel had not. This jealousy from this previous wife, from Jacob's favored wife, might have been inspired Jacob to withhold himself from Leah in the effort to give Rachel a child to call her own. Therein is our summary of Genesis chapter 29.